When I opened my daughter Maya's senior yearbook and saw that they had cropped her out of every single group photo, leaving empty spaces and awkward compositions where she should have been standing proudly with her classmates, I knew this wasn't an accident or simple oversight. This was deliberate erasure, systematic exclusion designed to pretend my daughter had never existed at Jefferson High School. For 4 long years, I had watched Maya navigate the subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination that came with being one of only 3 Black students in her graduating class. Had seen her work twice as hard for half the recognition, had witnessed her quiet dignity in the face of microaggressions and outright hostility from both students and staff members who seemed determined to make her invisible. But this yearbook was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be her legacy, her permanent proof that she had not only survived, but thrived despite everything they had thrown at her along the way. Instead, it was a carefully curated collection of photos that told a complete lie about her high school experience, a revisionist history that erased her contributions and achievements with surgical precision. Maya wasn't just missing from random group shots or casual candid photos. She had been systematically removed from pictures of the debate team she had captained for 2 consecutive years, the honor society she had helped found and led as president, the volunteer club where she had organized 3 major charity drives that raised thousands of dollars for local families in need. It was as if the most accomplished student in the entire senior class had been surgically removed from her own story, airbrushed out of existence by people who couldn't bear to acknowledge her success. But what I handed Principal Davidson at graduation that day would expose not just this yearbook scandal, but a pattern of institutional discrimination so extensive and well documented that it would bring the entire school district to its knees and force a reckoning that was decades overdue. The yearbook had arrived 3 weeks before graduation, delivered to excited seniors who had been counting down the days until they could finally see the culmination of their high school journey, captured in glossy pages that would preserve their memories forever. Maya had been particularly excited to receive her copy, having worked harder than any student I'd ever known to earn her place in Jefferson High School history. She maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA, while juggling multiple extracurricular activities, extensive volunteer work in the community, and a demanding part-time job to help with college expenses that our family couldn't cover alone. She had been accepted to 3 Ivy League schools with full academic scholarships, an achievement that should have made her the pride and joy of Jefferson High School, the student they pointed to as evidence of their commitment to academic excellence and inclusive education. Instead, she had become their most inconvenient truth, a living reminder that their precious reputation for nurturing academic achievement was built on the backs of students they preferred to keep invisible and marginalized. When Maya first flipped through the yearbook that sunny afternoon in our living room, I watched her face change from pure excitement to confusion, to deep hurt, to something much darker and more dangerous. A cold, calculated anger that I had never seen in my gentle, optimistic daughter before this moment. She called me over to look at the photos without saying a word, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly as she pointed out each deliberate omission with the systematic thoroughness that had made her such an exceptional student. There she should have been, standing front and center with the debate team after their state championship victory. But the photo had been cropped to exclude her entirely, leaving an awkward empty space where the team captain should have been. There was the Honor Society induction ceremony where she had delivered the keynote address. But somehow Maya wasn't visible despite being the founding president and the student who had initiated the entire organization. Page after page revealed the same heartbreaking pattern of erasure, the same careful editing that transformed Maya from the school's most accomplished student into a ghost who had apparently never existed at all in the official history of Jefferson High School. The systematic nature of Maya's exclusion became even more apparent and devastating when we began comparing her yearbook to those of her classmates and friends who were willing to share their copies with us. Through social media connections and longtime friendships, we were able to access the original photographs before they had been edited and manipulated for final publication in the yearbook. Maya had been front and center in virtually all of the group shots, her natural leadership abilities and exceptional academic achievements having earned her prominent positions in every organization she had chosen to join during her 4 years at Jefferson High School. She was the student other students looked to for guidance, the one teachers called on when they needed someone reliable and capable, the one administrators praised in private while apparently working to minimize her public recognition. But somehow, between the original photography sessions and the final yearbook printing process, she had been carefully cropped out, digitally airbrushed away, or completely removed from her own high school story with the kind of precision that could only come from deliberate intent. The yearbook committee, led by English teacher Mrs. Patterson and supervised directly by Principal Davidson himself, had made conscious, calculated choices about which version of Jefferson High School's history they wanted to preserve for posterity and future generations. And in their carefully constructed version of reality, Maya Thompson, valedictorian, debate champion, honor society founder, scholarship recipient, community volunteer, simply didn't exist in any meaningful way. The message was clear and devastatingly hurtful. Even when Black students excelled beyond every measure of success the school claimed to value and promote, they could still be erased from the official record with complete impunity. This wasn't just about yearbook photos anymore, wasn't just about hurt feelings or wounded pride. This was about institutional racism so deeply embedded in the school's culture that it operated automatically, invisibly, systematically eliminating evidence of Black achievement while preserving a carefully curated image of white excellence and success. But Maya's erasure from the yearbook was just the most recent and visible example of 4 years of systematic discrimination that I had been meticulously documenting since her very first day as a freshman at Jefferson High School. It had started small, as these insidious things always do, with teachers consistently mispronouncing her name despite repeated corrections and helpful phonetic spellings, with guidance counselors steering her away from advanced placement classes despite her obvious academic abilities and strong test scores, with coaches and activity sponsors overlooking her for leadership positions on teams and in clubs where she was clearly the most skilled and dedicated participant. Maya had learned early in her high school career not to complain too loudly or push back too forcefully against these slights, understanding instinctively that Black students who demanded fair treatment were quickly labeled as difficult, aggressive, or ungrateful for the opportunities they had been given. Instead, she had channeled her frustration and disappointment into relentless excellence, working harder than anyone else, achieving more than anyone thought possible, believing with the optimism of youth that her success would eventually speak for itself and force recognition from even the most reluctant administrators. I had watched her win academic competitions only to see other students receive the recognition and praise in school announcements and newsletters. I had seen her organize successful fundraisers and charity drives that were credited to white students in official school communications. I had witnessed her give presentations and speeches that earned standing ovations from audiences, only to watch teachers assign group project leadership roles and academic honors to less qualified white classmates. Each individual incident seemed small and possibly explainable in isolation, the kind of thing that could be dismissed as a misunderstanding or oversight. But together, viewed as a comprehensive pattern over 4 years, they formed a clear and undeniable picture of systematic marginalization designed to keep Maya successful enough to avoid legal challenges, while keeping her invisible enough to maintain the school's preferred narrative about itself and its student body. The breaking point in our relationship with Jefferson High School had come during Maya's junior year when she was suddenly and inexplicably passed over for valedictorian status, despite having the highest grade point average in the school's recorded history. The administration had mysteriously changed the ranking criteria just weeks before the announcement, adding subjective measures like school spirit and community involvement that somehow managed to elevate a white student with significantly lower grades to the top position in the class rankings. When I had requested a formal meeting to discuss this sudden change in policy and its impact on my daughter's academic standing, Principal Davidson had been patronizing and dismissive in a way that made my skin crawl. He suggested that Maya should be grateful for all the opportunities she'd been given at Jefferson High School and should focus on being a positive role model for other students like herself, rather than making trouble about administrative decisions that were in the best interests of the entire school community. The phrase, "students like herself," had hung in the air between us like a threat, making it crystal clear that my daughter's race was the primary determining factor in how she was perceived and treated by the school administration. That meeting had been the exact moment I started keeping detailed, systematic records of every interaction, every slight, every instance of discrimination that Maya faced at Jefferson High School. I documented emails with timestamps and screenshots, recorded phone conversations when legally permissible, saved copies of all official communications, and maintained a comprehensive file of evidence that told the real, unvarnished story of Maya's high school experience. I had hoped desperately that I would never need to use this documentation, had prayed that things would improve naturally, that fairness and justice would eventually prevail through normal channels and administrative processes. But the yearbook incident had made it painfully clear that the school would continue erasing Maya's achievements and contributions until someone with power and resources forced them to acknowledge what they had been doing for years. The folder I carried to graduation that day contained 4 years of carefully documented evidence that would expose not just the yearbook scandal that had finally opened my eyes completely, but the entire system of institutional discrimination that had shaped and damaged Maya's high school experience from day one. Inside that thick manila envelope were printed emails from teachers and administrators making casually racist comments they thought would never be seen by parents or oversight authorities, recorded phone conversations where school officials admitted to treating Maya differently because of her race and their assumptions about her family background, photographs and documents proving that her achievements had been systematically credited to other students or minimized in official school, communications and detailed timelines showing how the school had consistently undermined her success, while promoting and celebrating less qualified white students for identical or lesser accomplishments. But the centerpiece of my comprehensive documentation was a thorough analysis of the yearbook editing and production process, complete with before and after photographs that proved beyond any reasonable doubt that Maya's removal had been deliberate, systematic, and coordinated at the highest levels of school administration. I had hired a private investigator with experience in educational discrimination cases to interview former yearbook committee members, student photographers, and school staff members who were willing to speak confidentially about what they had witnessed and been asked to do. Their sworn statements revealed a culture of casual racism that extended far beyond just photo editing, painting a picture of an institution where exclusion and marginalization were standard operating procedures. Students had been explicitly instructed to minimize Maya's presence in candid shots and group photos. Teachers had actively discouraged volunteer photographers from featuring her prominently in any official school publications, and the final editing process had included specific written instructions to balance the diversity in group photos by reducing Maya's visibility and prominence wherever possible. The folder also contained internal communications between school board members discussing what they euphemistically called the Maya problem, and strategizing about how to manage her undeniable academic success without giving her too much recognition or public visibility that might upset other families or challenge the school's carefully cultivated image. As I sat in the packed graduation auditorium, watching my daughter deliver her hard-fought valedictorian speech with the grace, intelligence, and dignity that had defined her character throughout 4 difficult years at Jefferson High School, I felt the weight of that evidence-filled folder in my hands and knew with absolute certainty that everything was about to change forever. Maya had fought tooth and nail to reclaim her rightful position as valedictorian through a formal appeal process that had taken months of legal maneuvering and required intervention from civil rights attorneys who worked pro bono because they believed in the justice of her case. But even her eventual victory had been minimized and undermined by an administration that seemed incapable of acknowledging her achievements without qualification or backhanded compliments. They had scheduled her valedictorian speech for the very beginning of the graduation ceremony, before most families had arrived and found their seats, and had given her strict time limits and content restrictions that other speakers hadn't faced in previous years. Her speech was absolutely brilliant and carefully crafted, acknowledging the challenges she had faced without directly attacking the institution that had tried to break her spirit, calling for future students to demand better treatment while maintaining the dignity and composure that had carried her through 4 years of systematic discrimination and exclusion. As she spoke eloquently about resilience and perseverance, about refusing to be made invisible or silenced, about the critical importance of documentation and evidence in fighting institutional injustice, I could see Principal Davidson shifting uncomfortably in his seat on the stage. He knew instinctively that Maya's words carried weight and meaning beyond their surface message, that she was speaking directly and personally about the experiences that had shaped and scarred her time at Jefferson High School. When Maya finished her powerful speech to thunderous applause from an audience that was finally beginning to understand what an extraordinary student they had almost lost to discrimination and neglect, I knew it was time to deliver the folder that would ensure this systematic abuse could never happen to another student at Jefferson High School. Principal Davidson was working the crowd after the ceremony, greeting families and posing for celebratory photos with graduates and their proud relatives, when I approached him with my folder, my hands completely steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to unleash on his career and reputation. "I have something important for you," I said quietly but firmly, extending the thick manila envelope that contained 4 years of meticulous evidence gathering and documentation. Comprehensive documentation that I think you'll find very interesting and enlightening. His face immediately went pale with recognition as he heard the threat in my calm, controlled tone, understanding instinctively that this wasn't a casual parent interaction or friendly post-graduation chat, but something much more serious and potentially devastating to everything he had built at Jefferson High School. When he opened the folder with trembling hands and saw the first few pages, side-by-side photographs showing Maya's systematic removal from yearbook pictures alongside the original unedited versions, his hands actually started shaking visibly. The evidence was overwhelming and absolutely undeniable, presented with the kind of meticulous organization and professional documentation that comes from someone who has spent years preparing for exactly this moment of reckoning. "This is just a small sampling of what we've collected," I told him quietly, maintaining my composure while being fully aware that other families were nearby and watching our interaction with growing curiosity and concern. The complete documentation, including sworn statements from current and former staff members, has already been submitted to the school board, the district superintendent, the State Department of Education, and the local NLAACP chapter. "I thought you should have the courtesy of seeing it before tomorrow morning's emergency school board meeting that's been called to address these serious allegations." The look of absolute panic and dawning realization that crossed his face was worth 4 years of watching my daughter face discrimination with quiet dignity and determination. The explosive aftermath that followed my delivery of that carefully prepared folder was swift, comprehensive, and absolutely devastating for everyone who had participated in Maya's systematic erasure and discrimination over her 4 years at Jefferson High School. Principal Davidson tried desperately to claim that the yearbook editing had been nothing more than an innocent mistake, a series of unfortunate oversights and technical errors that could be easily corrected in future editions, and didn't represent any kind of intentional discrimination or bias. But the evidence I had compiled over 4 years made it completely impossible to maintain that narrative or dismiss the charges as misunderstandings, showing clearly and undeniably that Maya's removal had been part of a deliberate, coordinated pattern of institutional discrimination that extended throughout her entire high school career and affected every aspect of her educational experience. The school board was immediately forced to launch a formal investigation that quickly expanded beyond just the yearbook incident to examine the broader culture of racism, exclusion, and systematic marginalization that had been allowed to flourish at Jefferson High School for years. Local media outlets picked up the story when the NAACP released carefully selected portions of my documentation to the press. And suddenly the school district found itself under intense scrutiny from state education officials, federal civil rights investigators, and advocacy groups that had been waiting for exactly this kind of documented case to challenge institutional racism in public education. Teachers and administrators who had made casually racist comments in emails and phone conversations they thought were private and would never be revealed suddenly found themselves facing formal disciplinary action and potential termination. School officials who had participated in Maya's marginalization and exclusion discovered that their carefully maintained plausible deniability had been thoroughly demolished by 4 years of meticulous record-keeping and evidence collection. The yearbook company was forced to halt distribution of all remaining copies and commit to reprinting the entire senior edition with Maya properly included in all photographs where she belonged. But the damage to the school's reputation and credibility was immediate and irreversible. Within 6 months of that graduation day confrontation, Principal Davidson had been forced to resign in complete disgrace, choosing early retirement rather than facing the formal disciplinary action and potential criminal charges that would have ended his career permanently and followed him for the rest of his professional life. Mrs. Patterson and 3 other teachers directly involved in the yearbook scandal were quietly transferred to administrative positions where they would have no direct contact with students, effectively ending their classroom careers and removing them from positions where they could continue to harm vulnerable students. The school district was forced to implement mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff members, establish new oversight procedures for yearbook production and all school publications, create formal policies to prevent the kind of systematic discrimination that Maya had endured, and undergo regular monitoring by state and federal education authorities. Most importantly, from my perspective, they were forced to acknowledge publicly and officially that Maya Thompson had been the victim of institutional racism and systematic discrimination, and to issue a formal apology for the harm that had been done to her academic progress, emotional well-being, and future educational opportunities. The financial settlement they eventually reached with our family included not just substantial monetary compensation for the damages Maya had suffered, but also the establishment of a scholarship fund in Maya's name to support other students from underrepresented backgrounds, and the creation of new systems to monitor and prevent discrimination against future students who might face similar challenges. Maya's story became a widely studied case study in civil rights education, used in teacher training programs and school administrator courses across the country, to illustrate how seemingly small acts of discrimination and exclusion can accumulate into systematic oppression that violates students' fundamental rights to equal educational opportunities. Today, Maya is thriving academically and personally at Harvard University, where her exceptional academic abilities and natural leadership skills are properly recognized, celebrated, and nurtured rather than minimized, hidden, or systematically undermined by institutional racism. She has founded a student organization specifically focused on supporting first-generation college students from underrepresented backgrounds, helping them navigate the challenges of elite higher education while maintaining their cultural identity and personal values. She regularly speaks at high schools across New England about the critical importance of documentation and advocacy in fighting institutional discrimination, sharing her story to help other students and families recognize the warning signs and take action before years of damage accumulate. The confidence, resilience, and advocacy skills she developed through surviving and ultimately conquering Jefferson High School have made her a powerful voice for educational equity and justice, and she plans to pursue a career in civil rights law, specifically to help other families navigate the complex challenges she faced during her high school years. Maya keeps a copy of her original yearbook, the one where she was systematically erased and excluded, as a permanent reminder of how far she has come and why her advocacy work matters so much to communities across the country. She also has a copy of the reprinted version, where she appears prominently and appropriately in every photo where she belonged, but she says the original version is actually more important and meaningful because it tells the unvarnished truth about what many talented students still face in schools across America every single day. The comprehensive investigation that followed my delivery of that evidence-filled folder revealed that Maya's experience was far from unique at Jefferson High School, but was actually part of a long-standing pattern of discrimination and exclusion that had affected multiple students from diverse backgrounds over many years. Other families came forward with their own heartbreaking stories of systematic exclusion, academic undermining, social marginalization, and emotional abuse that had driven talented students away from opportunities they had rightfully earned through hard work and dedication. The school district was forced to examine not just individual incidents of discrimination, but the entire institutional culture that had allowed such systematic abuse to flourish unchecked for decades, without oversight or accountability. Maya's case became the catalyst for comprehensive educational reform that changed not just Jefferson High School, but influenced policy changes throughout the entire state education system and beyond. New laws were passed requiring schools to maintain better documentation of student achievements and implement transparent processes for academic recognition that couldn't be manipulated to exclude students based on race, ethnicity, religion, or other protected characteristics. Looking back now with the clarity that time and distance provide, I realize that the yearbook incident, devastating and hurtful as it was to discover, actually provided the perfect opportunity to expose and address a much larger problem of institutional racism that had been harming students for years. Maya's systematic erasure from her own high school story was so blatant, obvious, and undeniable that it made it impossible for the administration to dismiss or minimize the broader pattern of discrimination we had carefully documented over 4 years. The visual evidence of her deliberate removal from photos was something that even the most reluctant observers couldn't explain away, rationalize, or dismiss as coincidence or misunderstanding. It forced long overdue conversations about institutional racism that might have taken years or decades to initiate through other means, and it created real accountability where none had existed before. Most importantly, it ensured that Maya's legacy at Jefferson High School would be defined not by her systematic erasure and exclusion, but by her courage in fighting back and creating meaningful change for future students who deserved better treatment. The folder I handed Principal Davidson that graduation day contained much more than just evidence of wrongdoing and discrimination. It contained the comprehensive blueprint for systematic change that would prevent other families from enduring what we had experienced over 4 long, difficult years. Maya's story proves definitively that documentation matters, that persistence and patience pay off, and that sometimes the most powerful response to attempted erasure is to make your presence impossible to ignore or dismiss. When institutions try to make you invisible, the most radical and effective act is to demand to be seen, to insist on your rightful place in the story, and to use your voice and evidence to ensure that others won't face the same discrimination and exclusion. Was I wrong to wait so long to expose the discrimination Maya faced instead of acting sooner? Should I have confronted the administration earlier instead of documenting years of systematic harm? Would you have handled it differently if your child was being systematically erased from their own achievements and contributions? Sometimes the most effective justice requires patience, careful preparation, and the willingness to gather overwhelming evidence that makes denial impossible and accountability inevitable. When they try to crop your child out of the picture, sometimes the only truly effective response is to make sure the whole world sees exactly what they tried to hide.